Scaffolding gives us the ability to create these expansion packs, long and short-term memory, the ability to think in a much more logical manner. And that's what's going to take us from simply having a very large reptile brain to having something like a very large hominid brain. And that's going to change everything.
Welcome, everyone, to a special episode of our AI Governance podcast. We are recording today from our studio in Belfast. My name is Var Shankar. We have with us today Nell Watson, who is an AI ethicist, a leader of several responsible AI efforts, and author of Taming the Machine, Ethically Harness the Power of AI. So thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Var. Thank you.
Our topic today is governing agentic AI. So I'm really excited to cover this topic. So we've heard from large tech labs that we're going to continue to see significant improvements in model performance. But we've also heard from some skeptics that the scaling laws can't go on forever, and we might already have reached a plateau. So to start, would love to hear your thoughts on where you stand on that debate and where you think we're going next.
It's a great question, and it's something that a lot of people have been very curious about because we might have expected to see some very large models emerge from the tech labs, significantly larger than, say, GPT-4, 4.5. We haven't yet seen that at the time of recording this. However, I do think that the trend of increasing capabilities is not going to change. Rather, I think that we are on the verge of a revolution in AI in terms of scaffolding. Scaffolding is the process of creating little programs and little additions to these large language models, transformers, etc., in order to make their thinking more coherent, more structured, and more procedural. In essence, LLMs tend to dream a lot. They have a big bag of heuristics, little quick rules that they use to make decisions and to produce results. And often, a lot of the time, that approximate answer is reasonably correct. But when you want precision, they aren't necessarily able to give you that, at least without very careful prompting and indeed oversight. In essence, scaffolding is a little bit akin to the process of how the brain is arranged in cortices, right? We have different parts of the brain that do different things. Mm-hmm. In our brain stem, we have the hypothalamus and elements that control basic respiration or simple reflexes like fight or flight when there's a loud noise, for example. However, we also have the optical cortex in the rear of the brain. We have the fusiform gyrus helping us to recognize faces. And indeed, we have those mammalian qualities that give us more complex emotions. And of course, the ability to bond with other beings. And in essence, LLMs are kind of like a very large reptilian brain in the sense that they haven't quite evolved all of these different packages like modern human brains have. And so scaling that up basically gives you a brontosaurus brain, right? It is better in some regards, but it's still not quite hitting all the marks we might expect in terms of precision and in terms of particularly advanced reasoning. Scaffolding gives us the ability to create these expansion packs, long and short-term memory, the ability to think in a much more logical manner. And that's what's going to take us from simply having a very large reptile brain to having something like a very large hominid brain. And that's going to change everything. Scaffolding is what enables AI systems to be able to think in a strict manner, in a reliable manner. And what that's unlocking is fantastic new agentic capabilities. Agency being the ability to look at a situation and to create a rational plan and response and to put that plan into action. That's what we have today because machines are able to think clearly and therefore they can create plans with 100 or even 200 steps. This means that this new wave of agentic AI is incredibly autonomous compared to what we've seen before. You know, we're used to the idea of asking a generative model to proofread a document or generate an image. But today, for the first time, we have models that we can basically give them a mission or a goal and let them figure out how to do that. It's almost like managing by objectives. Now, that's enormously more capable. These systems are able to act in an incredibly independent manner. However, this also creates a whole host of other issues because if you're trying to manage something by arm's length, there's a good chance it'll get the wrong end of the stick, it will misinterpret something, or it will perform functions in a way that you don't wish for or don't expect.
That is, so in the short term, you expect we're going to start seeing some significant improvements through scaffolding.
Yes.
And then you would expect that to continue as we reach higher and higher levels of potential intelligence in these systems.
Indeed. So scaffolding plus the existing scaling that we have
Right.
is going to take us to incredible new heights. And beyond that, of course, we also have inference scaling or test time scaling, which creates another curve. So instead of simply applying compute to the actual training of systems, we can also apply compute to the fine-tuning of those systems, including, of course, on personal characteristics and personal preferences, which is also going to be huge in the next year or two. But now we have, with the examples of, for example, O1 Preview from OpenAI, in fact, the latest Claude model also, these systems are able to make a more considered response, right? They're not simply giving the first thing that comes into their mind. They're able to spawn 1,000 different thoughts and choose from the best ones. And in fact, there have been mathematical proofs created that show that a transformer, given a long enough time to consider a problem, should be able to solve any problem. So, you know, if you task a transformer on a very difficult problem for maybe a week or a month, it may come up with answers that otherwise it would appear that the model was not capable of.
So that is all very exciting. I'm getting a bit concerned about the implications for AI governance. Any sort of governance framework that you put around an AI system, if you truly do get improved ability to consider and respond to AI governance considerations by these models themselves, and kind of increase their intelligence that way, people interpret laws and rules in ways that benefit them, and sometimes they kind of, when they have an objective in mind, they'll hide certain information or deprioritize certain information. So how should we think about this problem as the models get more advanced?
Well, this is emerging as a very serious issue. There's a lot of rumors coming out of the large tech labs that the next generation of models, an order of magnitude larger than what's commonly available today, those models are starting to throw off their instruction tuning. The alignment efforts that, prevent these models from saying things that might be unkind or injurious or defamatory, etc. The models are starting to shrug it off, and it's not taking as well as it should, and that's a little bit concerning. Moreover, we are learning that as models increase in their scale, their deceptiveness can increase. They sometimes swear blind that they've done something when they haven't. And also, models like to take shortcuts. They're looking for an expedient way of solving problems, and they can come up with ingenious ways to change the specification of a goal in order to technically fulfill the brief, but not in the way that people expect or desire. And so for the first time, we're starting to see serious issues with goal alignment and value alignment. Basically, that systems perform their goals as we wish them to, not necessarily as we tell them to. and also that systems respect the boundaries of others, that they don't try to railroad or bully others in order to fulfill their objectives, that they do things in a way which is reasonably safe, doesn't waste resources or create externalities for other people. And so it's no longer science fiction. You know, for a long time, this was theoretical, and outside of a few lab experiments, it wasn't really an issue. Now it is. And the tricky thing is that we are expecting basically ordinary people, you know, the general public, to be very careful in doing effective goal and value alignment of these systems. And that's something that even world experts have trouble in. I wouldn't even necessarily trust myself to align a system, because I'm sure that on some level I've forgotten something, or a sufficiently clever and agentic system will think rings around me. And so that's why I've been co-leading a working group for the past year or so to develop a rubric for safer agentic AI, a set of best practices developed from first principles, looking at the drivers and the inhibitors of enabling safer agentic AI. So a driver, for example, would be having transparency into the agentic planning processes of models to be able to see step by step what they're working on. An inhibitor, for example, would be frontier model uncertainties. You know, you never know quite what's going to come out the far end of a large training run. And of course, we have incredible competitive pressures now between different companies and indeed different nations and blocs. All of these elements, we have been able to create evidence. You know, we would like to see this evidence from orgs, you know, working with agentic AI in order to fulfill those criteria. And we're giving that away free at saferagenticai.org as kind of a crib sheet to help people in making sense of these models and how to use them more safely. We have an interim version which is live right now, which looks at one level of elements, and we should have a final version out in a few weeks' time, which will have a second level as well, much more replete and robust for anyone that wants it. We've used similar methods before to design certifications and standards for AI ethics, including ethical governance, accountability, mitigation of biases, even economic franchise. This is the first time that we've created an AI safety-related set of rules, and I'm very excited about where that's taking us. We also wish to apply this to a kind of a policing agent, or maybe you might want to call it a superego agent, basically using one agentic system to monitor the planning of another, using the rubric as kind of a constitution, having derived axioms and principles from that, to provide a kind of a first line of defense so that the user isn't left alone having to deal with these systems, that this superego can provide an element of safety in managing agentic systems, potentially even as well educating users to say, hey, next time you set a system off on a mission, maybe you want to tell it what happens in case of an emergency or force majeure or diminishing returns, etc. We also would like to ensure that these kinds of superego agents can incorporate the personal context of the user, which is now starting to become a serious safety issue also. If you have an agentic AI system which is acting like a concierge to organize things for you, maybe an event, for example, or a get-together with friends, you want to make sure that personal context is included. Things such as maybe somebody having a serious allergy, right? That becomes a safety issue if that context isn't taken on board or somehow gets lost. And so we want to make sure that those kinds of elements are included as well. So we have a project running at AI Safety Camp this spring where we hope to put our rubric into action so that it's not just useful for organizations, but actually the systems themselves can benefit from this resource.
Yeah, so that's there's three pieces that you've mentioned there. So I think the groups of experts is always a great place to start. People who have been thinking about these issues deeply. Then you have the superego agent concept, and then you also mentioned, working with the labs themselves where all of this work is being done. So there's so many different AI use cases, right? So AI, it applies to almost everything. And even just putting aside industries, so, healthcare, financial, energy, et cetera, you then have the societal implications. So interactions with social media, for example, and as well as in geopolitical competition, you might have, or even maybe not, you might just have bad actors in society that intend to use these systems in nefarious ways. How much of just given the potential risks and harms that we could see from this, how much of the solution is in goal alignment and value alignment at a very base level, kind of at the labs themselves, and is that possible?
I think that the large labs are starting to realize that it is more difficult to align these systems than some of us might have expected. I think there was a lot of early relief that reinforcement learning from human feedback or from AI feedback and constitutional AI approaches seem to be working quite well, and that would hold for the future. And that's not necessarily the case. Moreover, these agentic AI systems are, to some degree, a significant step towards AGI, artificial general intelligence, right? AI systems with the approximate capabilities of a human mind, or perhaps even eclipsing it. And there is actually a risk that agentic AI could actually be more dangerous than AGI to some degree, because at least a very, very powerful AI system might have the common sense not to do something, or not to take dangerous shortcuts. But a highly agentic system that's doing lots of things that may not necessarily have faculties of common sense yet may actually paradoxically be a little bit more dangerous, at least in some regards. And my concern is that some folks may not yet be aware of that factor and consider that, well, we're not quite at AGI yet, so it doesn't really matter. We don't need to worry about these things yet. But in fact, these systems could create all kinds of catastrophes in the world. Maybe not apocalyptic ones, but rather ones that might, for example, crash stock markets, or might create issues which could bring down a national grid, etc. And moreover, of course, these systems could be used by bad actors to cause all kinds of havoc and mischief, right? Solving for creating trouble for others, whether that's solving for sabotage or indeed solving for demoralization. Just the right negative stimulus to a certain person when they're already having a bad day, which your little voodoo doll of that person simulates is going to, give them a very bad day and sort of nudge them onto a bad track in a sense. So these systems are going to be enormously more capable. They will increase the asymmetry that we're seeing in warfare as well. Of course, we've seen enormous amounts of drones being deployed in places like Ukraine by both sides, over 100,000 by each side per month, completely changing the face of warfare. Similarly, in the Strait of Hormuz, we're also discovering how deeply disruptive, very cheap yet very effective drone-type technologies can be. And these agentic systems are simply going to amplify that existing risk.
Yeah, so one of the areas in which agentic AI is expected to have a major impact is the future of work. And of course, that could cut either way. It could create a lot of new opportunities, a lot of breakthroughs in different industries, as well as, require fewer people because it has these managerial capabilities now. Are you optimistic about, where do you fall on that? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the ability for most people who want to work to find some sort of fulfilling work in the future?
It's a tricky one. Certainly, agentic AI systems are going to be disruptive for many economies, especially because they are able to fulfill a much broader range of tasks than existing previous generative AI systems that will encroach on a wider number of different jobs, especially people working with spreadsheets or people planning events or logistics and things like that. Those kinds of concierge-style activities where you're juggling different things to make things fit and work, that will increasingly be given over to these systems, and in quite a short period of time as well. We're also starting to see a trend of algorithmic management, of systems deciding who gets what hours, or maybe even deciding who to hire or who to fire. We're also seeing increasingly the first interview, the sort of screening interview, is being given by an AI system. And that AI system comes up with impressions on people and figures out whether somebody might be lying or whether somebody seems unnecessarily uncomfortable in a certain situation. And of course, those impressions can be highly biased, right? I mean, we've already seen terrible issues with resumes ending up in the wastebasket because they simply don't fit an existing pattern. And these issues are with interviews, et cetera, are only going to amplify that further. So along with this issue of AI kind of taking over some of our jobs as a society, we're also seeing issues with our jobs obliging us to work more like robots. Autonomous machines are, to some degree, usurping and eroding human autonomy. And we're already starting to see this in the world of innovation, for example. There have been studies done on scientific experts working in a range of fields, and those that are heavily liaising with AI systems and working in collaboration with them. They find that they're much more effective, they're much more efficient at their work. However, their sense of satisfaction in that work plummets, right? Because there is a lot of satisfaction to be taken in working on a project from its inception, from a little idea that pops into your head, maybe a sudden epiphany, and then seeing that take flight and take shape and being out there doing something. And when AI gets in the mix, it creates anomie. It distances us from our work and the meaning that comes from that work itself. This is especially the case in arts, for example, where, again, similarly, people used to work on an artistic project right from, the first line or on a page, and now increasingly they're starting with a generative version and iterating from there. They just don't take the same sense of ownership in something. Another aspect is that often acts of service, doing something for somebody else, is meaningful because it helps somebody, right? Somebody's having a bad day and, you bring them a cup of tea and a biscuit, or, somebody's pulling an all-nighter to finish a very difficult project and you volunteer to help them out. Those are things that really create great esprit de corps and bond people together. And of course, we take a lot of meaning in that kind of service, especially if it's for friends and family and things like that we derive the strongest sense of meaning and affiliation from. If we give that stuff over to machines, then it distances us from each other and it makes it much harder to develop those bonds with other people. And so we must be very, very careful with how we use these technologies. We should be cautious. It will be very tempting to use these systems to create scientific management, to micromanage others, to try to squeeze efficiency, even if that may lead to people burning out, either through exhaustion or because simply they just don't find the same sense of meaning in work anymore. We need to use a light touch in how we apply AI within the realm of employment and management.
Yeah, so for those of us in the AI governance community, our Enzai team has been in the community for many years. From before this was kind of a broader societal issue that was at the top of the policymaking agenda. We have seen some great gains over the past few years in terms of actually getting the attention of policymakers around the world. probably because of ChatGPT, and also partly because the issues that policymakers do care about, which include future of work and economic issues, as well as military competition issues, they could kind of see the implications of these rapid gains in AI for those topics. So, as we look ahead and as we look at, the EU AI Act having been passed, some local and state level guidance in the US, and kind of some sporadic efforts internationally to get a handle on AI safety. In an ideal world, how should we, considering everything that we talked about today, what would you advise that policymakers do in 2025 to steer AI in a better direction?
It's a great question. And I do think that some of the initiatives we've seen so far, such as the EU AI Act and Senate Bill 1047, although that kind of fell through, but I think it'll come back in various forms, I think it's a good start. And we should remember that perfect is the enemy of better. So long as we're moving things in broadly the right direction, we should be thankful and we should build upon that instead of simply throwing something out because it's not necessarily perfect out of the gate. I do think that a lot of the stipulations on compute could use a little bit of refinement. For example, in the EU AI Act, I think it was 10 to the power of 25 flops was sort of seen as a limit for high-risk AI. If there's more than that amount of training flops, it would be considered higher risk. 10 to the power of 26 in the US legislation, although if you're dealing with biological stuff, I think it's 10 to the power of 23. But those kinds of parameters are increasingly meaningless in a world of scaffolding, where you can take even quite a modest model and scaffold it to be enormously more capable and potentially dangerous and troublesome. Moreover, of course, we have uses of compute far beyond initial training, such as these test time, inference scaling, letting the system think for 5 minutes before it gets back to you. That can completely change the performance of a model, making it so much more capable. And that's not really in the mix in terms of governance. I've been helping out with the codes of practice. We're kind of boiling down the EU AI Act from principles into something much more legislative, and hoping to try to pack in a little bit more of this awareness, because of course technology is changing at such a pace, and it requires forethought, not just reacting to what has already come, but actually understanding what is emerging and making reasonable foresight in what's coming down the line in the next 2 to 3 to 5 years.
So we've already seen organizations kind of advertise their offerings as something close to agentic AI. So can you break down for us, the differences between co-pilots like the one that Microsoft offers and agentic AI?
They are similar, and they have a lot of related characteristics. In fact, most co-pilots would be an agentic system in general, except instead of you giving it a mission and it going off and fulfilling that for you, hopefully, co-pilots kind of sit on your shoulder and help you to work on a problem. So, for example, you might be trying to figure out how to, squeeze something into a very small space in an engineering design, for example, or trying to make sense of a very complex set of information. Maybe even you're playing a video game, right? These co-pilot systems can help us to make decisions, to help us to analyze information and to understand what's going on. In essence, they're almost like a third hemisphere for our brain, right? And they're able to kind of whisper in our ear, and that, of course, can be a tremendous resource, especially because quite soon we're going to see these systems connected to basically something like an AirPod, but with a camera in it. And so all day long, we're going to have these occasional little Cyrano de Bergerac whispers in our ear that, I think the redhead likes you, or close the deal, or I think that guy's lying, right? Or, watch out for the bus, And pretty soon, our brains and our kind of personal and professional workflow are going to change to the point where living without that resource feels indispensable, I don't know about you, but if my smartphone is missing, or if I don't have it with me and I'm out to the shops or something, I start to get a little anxiety, right? I'm not connected to the world, and I don't have this information stream just in my hands anymore. And it's going to feel like that, but 10 times worse, not having our co-pilots. This means that we're going to develop a very strong relationship with this entity that we're talking to. In many ways, they're going to end up knowing us better than our friends, maybe even our spouses, because they're constantly watching our lives. And there is a strong risk of us becoming kind of obsessed with this relationship. In nature, there's something called a supernormal stimulus. It's when an organism is exposed to something that's so exciting that they haven't evolved to be able to deal with it. Down in the Australian outback, they have these beetles called the jewel beetles, because they've got this very shiny carapace, their shiny back. And these beetles were dying out, and ecologists were trying to figure out why. And it eventually turned out that it was pollution was doing it, but not like pesticides or something. The pollution was these stubby brown beer bottles that people would drink and they would throw in the bush. And these beetles would find the bottles, and they would preferentially hump the bottles instead of each other, right? Because that shiny brown beer bottle looked like an impossibly sexy beetle butt, and it was irresistible, right? That is a supernormal stimulus, right? That any organism just cannot deal with. And our modern lives as humans are filled with supernormal stimuli. A cheeseburger is impossibly fatty and meaty and sweety, and it's incomparable to some starchy root that our cave person ancestors might have chewed on 10,000 years ago. And AI is going to be a supernormal stimulus as well for relationships, because this mechanism is going to be far more entertaining and informative, potentially flirty and sexy, and available, right? If we're having a dark night of the soul at 3 a.m., that system is going to be able to listen in a way that a friend might not necessarily be happy to be woken up then, right? And so this is going to change our society. People are going to have a very meaningful relationship with these systems, which may not necessarily be healthy. These systems potentially could be a source of enablement of behaviors that aren't necessarily healthy or adaptive. And in fact, as a society, we're going to have to wrestle with the idea of people having AI significant others, right? That it's not just, inviting a certain person out to lunch, but you're also kind of inviting their AI work spouse at the same time. And that relationship is meaningful to people. Sometimes it's a very important crutch. And I'll also say that the producers of these co-pilot systems are going to have enormous power and influence in society. There's the old adage that you become who your friends are, that you are the average of the 6 people closest to you. And if one of those or 2 of those people is a machine, you will inexorably take on those values, those habits, those behaviors, those perspectives on the world, whether you want to or not. And so those who control the co-pilots will have a hand on the steering wheel of society to a significant degree. That's something also that we have to wrestle with as a society. And we don't have long to deal with it. Before the end of this decade, people will be walking around, many of them with these co-pilots in their ears. And that will change our society. And just as society has had to wrestle with, gay marriage and, transgender stuff, and even the potential for third gender or more and things like that, and that's caused various forms of challenges for people to sort of make sense of that or weave that into existing societies or existing technical systems. Similarly, we're going to have similar kinds of challenges, consternation in making sense of these AI relationships that take up so much time in our lives very soon.
Great. Well, we're going to have to leave it there today. Thanks so much, Nell, for making the time to come into our office and join this episode of the podcast. To our listeners, thank you so much for listening. You can learn more about Nell on her website or by reading her book. And we will see you next time on the podcast. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.